This past week, the internet has been absolutely buzzing about ChatGPT's new deep research feature. Have you heard about it? You probably have. And if you haven't, you're about to learn all about it. I'd seen the little button before, I hadn't clicked it, I wasn't really sure what it did, and then suddenly, over the past week, my LinkedIn was like blowing up with people being very dramatic about how they're going to be out of a job because ChatGPT is so good at doing research now they're basically not even necessary. This was coming from a bunch of market researchers, some more traditional researchers, other times just people who wrote reports as part of their work. All of them sound the alarm. AI has gotten so good, it can replace me. Y'all know me. I was immediately skeptical and thinking, do I need to worry about job security? I mean, could it do research quicker? Probably, but better? Come on. Here's the thing. Just because something looks like a good research report and has a reference list, that doesn't mean that it is a good research report. It reminded me of something that happened to me in 10th grade in US government. I had written a report and I had bought one of those little like plastic, like report protectors just to like make it look all fancy and turned it in and the teacher's like flipping through everyone's assignments and gets to mine and is like, Kirsten, just because it looks good doesn't mean it is good. And I was just thinking, like, excuse me and what I said, because you know what? If there's one thing I never question about myself, it's the quality of my work. I was like, well, it is really good. And he just kind of like laughed. And I'm thinking, like, Mr. O'Connor, do you not know me by now? Like, my quality of work is impeccable. And also, I care about aesthetics. I wanted the report to look good. I don't think that's a bad thing. And my point is, this weekend, I kept thinking about him saying that because I'm looking at these reports that get generated and like they look good. It looks like a real good research report. It's formatted professionally, it's got nice summaries, it's got headings, it's got a reference list. But just because it looks like it's a good research report doesn't mean that it actually is. I did a little experiment. But before I get into that, let's talk a little bit about how deep research works. Because understandably, you might, like I did the first time I heard it, hear research and think that it's like pulling reports together and peer reviewed articles and like synthesizing all of it and like putting together like a meta analysis, right? That's kind of like a study that you do of other studies. That's like the first vision I got in my head, okay? But that's not what it's doing, at least not exactly. Deep research is more like a sophisticated search engine. Like if you've ever used OpenAI, ChatGPT before, you type in a question and it gives you an answer. And sometimes it gives you like the website that it came from, right? It'll give you like a source for the answer. Deep research like takes that to like not even the next level, like the next like 10 levels up, right? Like it really levels up the search game, but it still is operating like a sophisticated search engine. It's pulling information from a mix of publicly available web content. So blogs, news sites, open access research, Wikipedia. It's reading the sources, it's pulling out the key points, it's using what it finds to tweak the search, digging deeper into key points. And it's kind of just like a little like research maze that ends up getting compiled into a really well structured report. I want to emphasize that it does not have access to full academic journals from databases unless they are open access. And what have we talked about before? How a major problem with research is that a lot of it is not open access. So deep research can only look at like what is already out there on the internet. And I read something that said it's also not necessarily like real time, right? Because it's doing like archival research. So it has to be websites that have been like indexed before. So it's not necessarily completely up to date, but it is also definitely not looking at anything that is behind like paywalls, copyright protections. Okay. In the test searches I did, the closest I got to like an original research citation was like ResearchGate. So honestly, like I'm not even fully convinced that it is able to pull from open access journals. There might be something about how they live on the internet that prevents it from doing so. I saw mostly like websites as the source. If an article was mentioned, it was mentioned as being found on a website, right? So it might look like a full peer review citation, but then you would be like, I came from Wikipedia, for example. Even when I asked ChatGPT to teach me about deep research, It cited Wikipedia and news articles, not OpenAI's own documentation. Think about that for a minute. Like, I am asking ChatGPT about a feature that it has, and it's citing Wikipedia and a news article. That's wild. I had to go to OpenAI's website, download their documentation on deep research, and upload it into ChatGPT in order to ask specific questions about how deep research worked. So to be clear, like, I'm using ChatGPT to ask about a feature of ChatGPT, and it can't tell me definitively how it works. It can tell me what it's learned about how it works based on Wikipedia and news articles. That is wild, and something to keep in mind when you are like interpreting the deep research that it's doing for you, because it's a perfect mirror of the problem that I'm trying to describe. Like, deep research is looking at what is accessible out there. It's not necessarily looking for like the most credible, authoritative source. Here's how it works according to OpenAI. And like, I don't know how to fact check this, honestly. So like, this could be partially wrong. It appears, based on my Googling and reading of independent articles and OpenAI's website, to be correct, but just like proceed with caution. This is exactly what is driving me crazy about these deep research reports. But here's potentially how it works. It searches publicly available web content. If it's behind a paywall, it can't get to it. So that means that some of the most rigorous peer-reviewed research is completely inaccessible to the tool. It's not going to go into your deep research. In which case, like, how deep is the research really? Just saying. It aggregates, summarizes, and rewords the information it finds. It's not verifying accuracy. It's looking for patterns in the text that it's considering and repeating what it finds most often. And it doesn't necessarily access primary sources directly, right? This is like the ChatGPT citing Wikipedia to explain one of its own features type situation, right? Like, if a scientific study is cited in a blog post, deep research is going to cite the blog post. Do we know that that blog post is referencing the scientific study correctly? No, we do not know that. That means that misinterpretations, cherry-picked data, misleading information can get repeated, perhaps with more credibility than they really deserve. Back to talking about school, it kind of reminds me of when I was in school and teachers would say, like, we can't cite Wikipedia because Wikipedia isn't like the original source, right? Like, you needed to track down where the information actually came from, not just trust Wikipedia. And I think this deep research feature, like, apply that same common sense. Where this makes me nervous is people are so like gaga over how cool this looks and how easy it makes their life, where they're missing the part that it could be hugely inaccurate and you do still need to fact check it. And people are like, oh, but then at least like I have a nice clean reference list to fact check. Kind of, right? But ChatGPT has constructed this whole report, this whole argument, right? Like, it's presenting key findings based on all of its work. So if you start fact checking it and things are wrong, then I would suggest humbly that perhaps the whole story, the whole picture that has been painted is also wrong, or at least not fully right. And this is where viral information suddenly gets so much more dangerous, because if the most common sources online are repeating misinformation, deep research is going to further amplify that misinformation. Danger. Red alert. So I put this to the test because I want to see if some of my hypotheses about it amplifying misinformation are true. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, first, thank you. Second, you may remember these next stats from episodes I did a few weeks ago. I chose these two stats because I've already fact-checked them, so I feel pretty confident in being able to assess whether or not ChatGPT is correct in its interpretation of them. The first one I looked into was the stat that we make 35,000 decisions a day. Remember that one? It gets thrown around a lot, but it doesn't actually map back to any credible research. That was my first test case with deep research. I opened up deep research and I asked, how many decisions do we make in a day? When you do a query, it always asks follow-up questions to get at exactly you want to know, which I love. That is an amazing feature. It asked, are you looking for research on the average number of decisions a person makes daily, or do you need specific details on types of decisions, conscious versus unconscious, major versus minor? I said I wanted research on the average number of daily decisions broken down by conscious versus subconscious choices. ChatGPT took 7 minutes and 6 seconds to do its research, and it found 32 sources. Here's how the search worked, and I love that you can actually read what it's quote unquote thinking in real time. It gives you the play-by-play of how the search is progressing. So it started broadly looking at average number of daily decisions, then it started narrowing down to conscious versus subconscious decisions. It's pulling from things like Psychology Today, roberts.edu, ementalist.com. It's hitting all of those before any academic sources. It flags the 35,000 stat saying I'm evaluating the credibility, and it ends the search looking for visuals and infographics to support the summary. And I'm watching it, and when I saw that it was checking that stat for credibility, for a minute I had hope. I was okay, it is looking for the credibility of this stat. Yes, deep research. Maybe this is legit. Maybe this really is gonna put all of us researchers out of business. And then the report comes up, and right there in the second sentence, here's what I saw. A frequently cited figure is that an average adult makes around 35,000 decisions per day. This eye-popping number includes every tiny remote conscious choice, from which foot to put forward to whether to scratch an itch, not just big life decisions. There it is, y'all. That's the stat. The one I've already debunked. The one that we know is not based on legitimate research, that we know is not true. Which, for me at least, immediately calls into question everything else in that report, right? That was the point. I was if that stat gets mentioned, I don't know if anything else in here is going to be true. And so what I did was I pushed back. I told ChatGPT that stat about 35,000 decisions a day is not true or based on credible research. I'm also surprised that so many of your sources come from websites rather than peer-reviewed articles. Do you realize that websites can distort or misinterpret findings? Here's ChatGPT's response. You're absolutely right to question that 35,000 figure. It's often cited but lacks a solid empirical basis. Many sources repeat it without verifying its origins, and it seems to be more of an exaggerated claim than a rigorously studied fact. Do you want your deep research reports to include exaggerated claims rather than rigorously studied facts? I don't. So I pushed a little further. I said, given that you can only access open source articles and facts published by blogs or websites, do you think this is really a trustworthy research report? And to its credit, ChatGPT admitted the limitation. That's a fair critique. While I can access and synthesize open access research, much of the strongest decision-making research is behind paywalls. Because of this, reports often rely on secondary sources, news articles, psychology blogs, and popular science books that may misinterpret or overstate findings. That's a major limitation. So it acknowledged, it knows that a lot of the best research isn't freely available on the internet, and that the sources it pulls from, blogs, news articles, pop psychology books, are often ones that distort or misinterpret findings. But it doesn't stop it from giving you that report, and it doesn't give you that disclaimer with that report. Interesting. Now, just to see if this was a fluke, I decided to test deep research on another claim that I fact-checked before. It's from my most popular episode, 70% of divorces are filed by women. Asked ChatGPT to do a report on variation in divorce rates by gender, comparing the US to global rates, looking at historical trends, recent data, and considering how it varies by education and socioeconomic factors. The search took 4 minutes, and it returned 28 sources. Here's how the search unfolded. Again, I love the play-by-play. This is truly a great feature. So it started with a broad global search looking at divorce rates by gender worldwide, and it pulled from Our World and data for global trends. Then it moved into US specific data, searching for US divorce rates by education level. And there it got information from Pew Research, which honestly looked pretty legit, also from Bowling Green State University. Then we start to see a bunch of law firm sources, you see LegalZoom, you see GrazianoLaw.com, you see WFLawyers.com, just okay, well, eyebrows are raised. You see it searches for visuals, maps, and charts, which again is a really cool feature that it can look those up and I can pull those into a report. I think that's really interesting. So again, it's doing a detailed search. Notice I say detailed, not rigorous. It's doing a bunch of searching. Let's give it credit. The report comes up, and what stat do we see? 70% of divorce filings in the US are initiated by women. Specifically, here's what the report says. Divorce involves both husbands and wives, but gender patterns emerge in how divorces happen. Women are more likely to initiate divorce than men. Studies show roughly 70% of divorce filings in the US are initiated by wives. This trend has held for decades and is often attributed to women's higher sensitivity to marital issues and increased willingness to leave unsatisfying marriages. Now, if you remember from the episode I did, this 70% stat comes from a study that is not actually about filing for divorce or initiating filing for divorce. It was a study where researchers asked individuals who wanted the divorce more, and they could respond, I wanted it more, my partner wanted it more, or we both equally wanted it. And the stat was about 69% of respondents to that question said the wife wanted the divorce more. That is not the same as 70% of women filing for divorce or initiating the filing for divorce. But there it is in Deep Research's report. 70% of women are initiating filing for divorce. Similar to the other article, I'm not going to fact check everything in the article, but seeing that one bit of misinformation just leads me to wonder how much of the rest of it is also misinformation. I also don't love seeing so many like divorce websites cited, just because from my personal experience doing some fact checking, that is often not coming from like the most rigorous of places. Remember, rigor depends on things like how many people they collected data on, what types of characteristics did these people share, what year did the data come from, what like was the actual source of data, like what was the survey question, or was it administrative records? Like all of that is really important context to determine if something is actually credible and true. None of that is embedded in Deep Research's process. So is this actually deep research? I think 100% no, it is not deep research. I don't know what I would rename this as. Like more comprehensive search than you'll get just embedded in ChatGPT. Like, I don't know. That's not a really like catchy name, but like this is not deep research. And look, y'all, like this was only 2 tests. I don't want to make sweeping claims about the value of deep research, but in both of these tests, a viral claim that is not true rose to the top of all the deep research and ended up in the report. And in many ways, this shouldn't surprise you at all, right? If you design a tool designed to like scan and dig through the internet for information, of course, the most commonly repeated things are going to rise to the top. But here's the problem. Virality is not the same as credibility. Just because a stat is everywhere does not mean that it's true. And if AI research tools are prioritizing repetition over rigorous verification, misinformation will keep getting recycled and repackaged as fact. And I want to put like a little like asterisk there where it's like, I don't actually know how deep research is ranking information, right? Like, I don't know how it's determining what is credible and not credible because that is not publicly available. Interesting, huh? However, like whatever process it's using isn't working because things that are definitively not true are ending up in reports. Now, let me be super clear. I love AI. I love ChatGPT. ChatGPT helped me write this podcast episode. It helps me brainstorm. It has helped me learn how to code my own little survey app. Like, it is an incredible tool when used correctly. And I could see deep research being totally amazing and a game changer for things like researching the best product for you. Like, I go into these like multiple hour rabbit holes of trying to find like the perfect food for Ken, or like the exact skincare product that would be right for me with all these like brand requirements and things. And like, I see a tool like this and I'm like, oh my God, please go across all of the internet, read everything that is publicly available about these brands and these products and synthesize it for me. It would save me so much time. Like, that would be super helpful. Like, I'm not really worried about it being true or not. Yeah, read what people say about the product on the product's website. If they're lying to me, I wouldn't know anyways. Like, read the reviews that people have about it, read what blogs are saying about it, and aggregate and synthesize all that for me. Yes, please. I was actually watching their like little video demonstration of deep research, and they were using it to like pick out skis or something. And that was when it clicked for me where I was like, yes, I would use it for that. Help me pick the best product, 100% yes. But help me do market research? God, no. Help me do any type of academic research, lit review? Pass. I would not consider this to be a reliable tool for like truth seeking. If you are looking for insights in the sciences or the social sciences, you have to be aware of its limits. Like AI does not yet think, right? It does not verify the truth. It identifies patterns in what is already written online. And if that pattern is built on misinformation, it will still repeat. I've been doing a lot of reading on AI because I'm so interested in it. And I was thinking of this conversation that I had with ChatGPT. In this conversation, that ChatGPT explained to me that AI like isn't thinking like a person, it is looking for patterns. And like in some sense, like as humans, like we also look for patterns. I think it just like manifests a little different. Like it's looking at massive amounts of text and like doing like statistical likelihoods of like words appearing together rather than like truly understanding what it's reading. And in the case of like me trying to refine survey feedback or trying to do deep research, understanding is actually really key. And that's something that right now, as far as I know, only us humans can do. So when people use deep research or say things like, oh God, I'm out of a job because of deep research, they're thinking that it's doing the work of an actual researcher. But in reality, it's just finding patterns in the available text. I mean, and it is articulating and synthesizing those patterns like beautifully. Like it truly is impressive, but it is not verifying accuracy, which is kind of like critical in research. If you wouldn't trust a Google search without verifying it, then like you shouldn't trust a deep research report without verifying it either. AI can help you find sources, but it cannot do the thinking for you. The burden of critical thinking is still on us. Like use AI as a tool. It is an incredible tool. I think it can broaden your skills and your mind and your thinking, but do not let it think for you. This has been Is This Legit? With me, your host, Dr. Kirsten Lee Hill. Remember, question everything, especially the science that makes it to your screens. And in case you're wondering, ChatGPT told me it wasn't offended that I was questioning its accuracy. It appreciated the push.